Hank, a number of us have been to Washington, and we've talked about what needs to be done, especially on the regulatory side. And one of the things that I know I've talked about in Washington is consolidating the regulators. You talk about it in your book.
Yeah.
It seems so difficult. There are barriers. Give us some insight. What are the barriers?
Oh, well, I'd say I think the thing that was so unique during the crisis, and because of the trust that Ben, Tim, and I had in each other, was to have organizations work as closely as they're working together. Because you see right now the turf fighting among the individual regulators as they fight. John, the biggest thing I learned in the first year going to Washington, and I'm sure I should have known beforehand, but I didn't, was just how arcane and almost bizarrely arcane and outdated our regulatory system was, and just a patchwork quilt that had been put together over the years with gaping holes and with overlap. And you had, just in terms of the prudential regulation, you have, in addition to the Fed and the FDIC, you've got the OCC and the OTS, and it's and we also had the SEC then with the with the investment banks, and you had 5 different regulators, and institutions would trade one regulator off against the other. I mean, part of the problem with AIG was you had this holding company on top of the regulated insurance companies, and no regulator was able to look at the whole situation. So, and the lack of power. So, I do think in terms of what needs to get done now, and I'm optimistic today that it is going to get done. And if it doesn't, I would say heaven help our country, because you're always going to have, as you and I and everyone who's been in markets know, you're always going to have periods of stress and turbulence, right, crises in the market. You're always going to have, no matter how good the regulation is, you're always going to have financial institutions fail. And so the 2 things I've been hitting is not just the consolidation, which we greatly need, and strong, consolidated, prudential, safety and soundness regulator for the big institutions, but I think we need, and I think Congress is moving in that direction, a systemic risk regulator that can look at any institution, regardless of type, and when they see any type of business activity that it threatens the system, that they've got, first of all, they've got access to all the information they need to monitor the markets. Then they can come in and restrain it, when there's a need to. And so we don't have just regulators focusing on the trees. We got someone on the whole forest. Mm-hmm. And then we need, which is really important, because no matter how good the regulators are, there will still be these problems. And we need resolution authority so that any institution, no matter how big, it's not too big to fail. That if they fail, then the regulator has the authority outside of the bankruptcy process to liquidate it. And it's not an easy matter. I think that regulators are going to be trained. It will take time, but they can be liquidated so they will not be propped up and preserved in their initial form. And I think even having to work with a regulator on a roadmap for how they'd be liquidated if they have to be, because otherwise you'll never have the market